Some important updates on the ongoing volcanic activity in Reykjanes, and more on this episode of the Reykjavik Newsdesk. So, as I reported last Friday, what began last Tuesday as a series of significant and powerful earthquakes, as well as GPS readings of magma rising to the surface to where it was literally raising the surface of the Earth, led scientists to believe that another eruption between Keilir and Fagradalsfjall, just as has happened last year and the year before that, was on its way now, this year, in summer of 2023. By the time you're watching this eruption may have already happened, or maybe it didn't. But either way, an eruption is due pretty soon. Or not. I'll get to that later, but I will still be linking a couple of live streams that point to the potential or current eruption area, whichever one applies. But anyway, here's what's happened over the weekend, as well as an answer to whether or not you will be able to leave the airport if this eruption occurs. First off, the earthquakes are still ongoing, but they have slowed down significantly. Remember, on last Friday, some 1,600 earthquakes had been reported between Tuesday and Friday. Well, between Friday and the time of this recording, Monday morning, that count is now up to 1,900. However, we did have a really powerful one last night, and the strongest earthquake that's been recorded so far has been a 5.2. Also, the magma has continued to rise to the surface, so close to the surface, in fact, that we can no longer use GPS to measure just how close to the surface it is. By late Saturday night, it was estimated that the magma had risen to some 500 meters below the surface of the Earth, and that's pretty close. You wouldn't want to be standing there close. And it's estimated that the magma dike is in this area on this map here. All this being said, geophysicists are very careful people in the statements that they make to the press. Okay, you won't hear them very often speaking in definitive terms. They still emphasize that even though all the indicators are there that an eruption is very, very likely, there's still a chance that the magma might not break through the surface and it might just slurry back down into the Earth again. Even the smallest indicators are playing out the same way they did last year and in 2021. For example, there's this borehole in the area that is normally pretty dry. But last year and the year before, just before the eruption, it began overflowing with water, and guess what? It's overflowing with water now too. Speaking of flowing, you may be wondering if there's a chance that lava from this eruption could block the roads between the international airport in Keflavik and the greater Reykjavik area. So here's a map of the area. This is the airport, and this is Keilir, and this is Fagradalsfjall. As you probably know, there are basically two roads that connect the airport to the rest of the country, routes 41 and 427, also known as Reykjanesbraut and Suðurstrandavegur, respectively. Between the two, Reykjanesbraut is definitely the more popular road to connect the airport to the greater Reykjavik area. On Saturday, geophysicist Þorvaldur Þórðarson said that there was a chance that the eruption could move north over Þráinskjald towards Reykjanesbraut. As you can see, the eruption area is pretty close to Reykjanesbraut, and there are very few obstructions between it and the road. However, he also said that the lava could flow south, and if that's the case, there's all kinds of little hills and mountains in the way that, as you can see, that would probably prevent the lava from getting anywhere near Suðurstrandavegur. But of course, this is all speculation. However, police in the area are going to be closing down some internal roads on the peninsula, but these are not roads that you would travel between the airport and the greater Reykjavik area anyway. That being said, if you're planning to come to Iceland, do call your airline, and the same applies if you're in Iceland and you're about to leave the country in the next few days. However, if you're in Iceland and you're planning on visiting the eruption site, if the eruption happens, in my last video, I gave some tips for tourists who want to visit a volcanic eruption site, and you can watch that video, but I just want to reiterate those tips again. First of all, check the weather forecast, and I've linked to the English language site of the Icelandic Met Office in the description, but dress for any weather anyway, and also bring plenty of food. If it erupts in the same area as it did last year and the year before, it's a pretty long hike, and you're going to want to have food with you. Second of all, listen to the guides. They know what they're doing. Third, if you think you're a safe distance from the lava, step back some more anyway, and also try to stay upwind, because while lava is, of course, dangerous, so are the gases that are emitted by an eruption. They can cause a lot of damage to your lungs, and you don't want to breathe them. Fourth, if you bring pets or small children, and honestly, why would you? But just in case, if you bring pets or small children, keep an eye on them at all times. And finally, and probably most importantly, if you are asked to leave the area, do so immediately. As before, I've linked to 2 live streams from the National Broadcasting Service RÚV, which are pointed at the potential or current eruption area, whichever one applies, and those are in the description below. In addition, I've also linked to, as I said, the English language site of the Icelandic Met Office. They have a lot of really cool information about the current activities that are in the area. And so if you want to geek out about the specifics of the science, I highly recommend checking out that site too. Above all, remember that volcanoes are not to be trifled with. I mean, they look very pretty, but, they are dangerous. And so do exercise caution, err on the side of caution as always, but also remember that we have a very robust and fast-acting system in place wherein multiple agencies are working with each other to ensure that everybody stays safe. For my part, this is a twice-weekly show, so I won't be doing daily updates on this, but you have the live streams, you have the Met Office's site about all these scientific specifics, so that should keep you informed and up to date on what's going on, and I may have a surprise in store for you later on. We'll just have to see. But hey, there's been other news happening in Iceland too, so why don't we talk a little bit about that? So in my last video, I talked about a cruise ship that's been parked outside of the North Icelandic town of Akureyri, and the residents of Akureyri had been complaining about emissions coming from the cruise ship. Well, spokespeople from the cruise ship have said that this was harmless steam, but it turns out that there's much more to this story than met the eye initially. Thorstein Johansson, who is an air pollution specialist at the Environment Agency of Iceland, isn't buying the official line. He thinks that this emission isn't steam being caused by a malfunctioning heating system. Rather, he believes that the cruise ship is using what's known as a scrubber, which is a type of machine that removes some or most, but not all, of the pollutants from the exhaust. Like a lot of cruise ships operate on diesel. And so some pollutants are probably, he believes, present in these emissions that are coming from this cruise ship. Either way, he's called for an investigation, and the Environment Agency is going to be going on board to inspect the ship. So stay tuned. In more tragic news, a search and rescue mission kicked off on Sunday evening when a plane sent out a distress call to the Icelandic Coast Guard, and then shortly thereafter, the Coast Guard lost all contact with this plane. Now, this was a very intense search and rescue operation. This involved the Coast Guard. It involved rescue squads from all over the area. It involved Icelandair. It even involved some tour groups. Weather conditions were very favorable for the search, and so things were going smoothly, and about 2 hours later, the airplane was found, and tragically, the pilot and 2 passengers died in an attempted crash landing. Next up is a story I've been dreading reporting because it's a story that even confuses Icelanders who are born and raised here, but it's a very important story. So let me give you the TLDR. This story is called the Lindarhvol matter, which is named after the company that's responsible for selling government assets. You see, in 2008, when our economy collapsed, the government took over our 3 largest banks. In 2016, a company called Lindarhvol was founded by the finance ministry, tasked with selling government assets to private entities. This company sold billions of ISK in government assets to private entities, and these sales were to be reviewed by the Icelandic National Audit Office. Now, this is where things get complicated, because in 2008, there was an audit, but the auditor at the time had to recuse himself because his brother was the director of Lindarhvol. So they called in the previous auditor instead, and he began to go over the sales of Lindarhvol. But then in 2018, another auditor took over, and his conclusion was, yeah, fine, everything's great, and there's nothing to see here, nothing shady at all about Lindarhvol's sales at all. It's all good. But this previous auditor disagreed vehemently and he submitted a report of his own. Now, the media had been asking repeatedly to see this particular report, but were denied. And a Social Democrat MP, Johan Paul Johansson, last March, he filed a formal question asking for the contents of this report, and he was denied the right to even file this question. Well, the Pirate Party took matters into their own hands, and they published the report in full on their website, and wow. In a nutshell, this report detailed a lot of red flags in how Lindequil conducted their business. There's a lot of unexplained payouts, a lot of sloppy paperwork, a lot of unnecessary and tedious regulations that Lindequil put in place, but then didn't even follow, and lots more. So this led to the parliamentary opposition to call for Parliament to be reconvened. It's summer, they're currently on summer break, but Prime Minister Katrin Jakobsdottir does not believe that Parliament needs to be reconvened over this, even though this is a very serious matter that falls under the auspices of Finance Minister Bjarni Benediktsson, who, it turns out, hasn't even read the report. On the lighter side, I have some elf news for you. That's right, elf news. Now, you may be familiar already with this contention that Icelanders believe in elves, or at least enough of them believe in elves to have serious reservations whenever there's a construction project that may disturb a natural formation that's known to be, or reputed to be, inhabited by elves. While the Icelandic belief in elves is probably overstated, there is a road project in the southeast that has a lot of people concerned about its effects on the purported elf population. You see, there's plans to build a road in a particular area near Hortnafjörður in southeast Iceland, and in the way of this road is this particular hill. And legend has it that this hill is an elf church, and the road administration wants to blow up or pave over this elf church, but there are some residents who are warning not to do this. Yes, there are residents who are pushing back against this on the grounds that destroying elf buildings, elf infrastructure, brings with it bad luck, but it looks like this is falling on deaf ears, and the road project is going to go forward anyway. The elf church is going to be demolished, so stay tuned for upcoming stories about elves wreaking havoc in southeast Iceland. And that's all I have for you today on the Reykjavik News Desk. Again, be sure and like and subscribe. And just as a reminder, on July 17th, I will be doing my next single topic video, which in this case is about the cultural and political divide between urban and rural Icelanders. Now, this was a video topic that was decided in a viewer poll, which is on my Patreon. Furthermore, on July 22nd, I'll be doing my next Ask Me Anything session, and this is so much fun. This is where patrons and I get together on a live call, and yes, ostensibly it's to ask me anything about myself or Iceland or Reykjavik, but it's also just a chance for all of us to hang out and just kind of have a laugh together. It's always a lot of fun, and I hope to see you there. These are both things, the viewer poll and the AMA, are things that you can participate in by signing up for my Patreon, which is linked in the description below. Which reminds me, I want to thank Corinne Vasquez, Marion Ward, Christopher Hunter, Marianne Moores, Kimberly McDaniel, Iceman98, and Octavia Hrund Jonsdottir for being patrons on the $20 level, Ian Kingsley and Lara Johnson for being patrons on the $15 level, and Hafstein Himinljómi Gregenosson, Stephen Ellis, and Vivi Carvalho Schaffner for being patrons on the $10 level. You folks rock. That's all from me at Newsdesk. Be good to each other.